Hey guys! Alright, I'm back with the last part of our lecture for today. So, the rest of the lecture, I'm going to talk some more about Papakrissi and a little bit about the Gawande article, and sort of look at them as models for our work. So we talked about Papakrissi's thesis in the last chunk. So now I want to go a little bit deeper into her essay. So let's look at her first couple of paragraphs, her introduction. So she writes, proponents of cyberspace promise that online discussions will increase political participation and pave the road for a democratic utopia. From this perspective, the alleged decline of the public sphere or civil society will be halted by the democratizing effects of the internet and its surrounding technologies. Conversely, skeptics caution that technologies not universally accessible, and ones that frequently induce fragmented, nonsensical, and enraged discussion, far from guarantee a revived public sphere. This study traces civility in cyberspace, guided by the assumption that if cyberspace has the potential to truly revive the public sphere, it should promote civility. Are online discussions truly civil? And if so, does that make them meaningful and, ultimately, democratic? So let's think about this as a first paragraph. So we don't yet have a thesis, and that's in part because her essay is longer than yours. We're not going to get her thesis until a little bit later. A couple of paragraphs in, you get that luxury if your essay is longer. For you guys, I would still recommend getting that thesis into that first paragraph. But notice how she flat out presents her research questions here at the end of this paragraph, and that can actually be like an effective introduction strategy for this kind of a paper to sort of just outline the question that you think of yourself as having been researching. So the other thing, I want you to notice that she's not really talking about specific sources in her introduction, but what she is talking about, what she found in her research, right? But in this synthesizing way, where she's talking, where she says that that some people say this and other people say this. That's the structure we get. Proponents of cyberspace promise this. Conversely, skeptics caution this, right? And then she's going to come in with a third position, right? So isn't that interesting? That's another version of that they say I say structure that we were working with essay 2, which I strongly recommend for you for essay 3 as well, even if you don't get there for the draft, right? Well, she says there are these two positions that scholars tend to take, and she's going to argue that there's a third one, right, that kind of puts those two positions together. So that seems like a really good way to introduce her argument and to suggest the stakes of it, to suggest that she knows the conversation through her research, and she's also contributing to that conversation. Here's her next paragraph. Civility has always been considered a requirement for democratic discourse. Defined frequently as general politeness and courtesy, civility is valued as an indicator of a functional democratic society. Conversations on the meaning of citizenship, democracy, and public discourse highlight civility as a virtue, the lack of which carries detrimental implications for democratic society. And yet, civility is misunderstood when reduced to interpersonal politeness because this definition ignores the democratic merit of robust and heated discussion. So, if we were to kind of take a step back and sort of think about the function of this paragraph, like its job in the structure of this essay, I think you would have to say that what she's doing here is she's defining some central terms, right? Civility is the main term she's going to rely on in her discussion, right? It is the key term of her essay. So notice what she does here really early on in the essay. She defines it. She spends an entire paragraph sort of laying the groundwork so that we understand what she means by that term and so that we can understand the complexities of that term. So this is an important thing to consider doing in your paper. You might not all need a sort of background or definitions paragraph, but you might. So Karina, going back to your example, which for some reason I remembered really well, about the new safe haven laws in Indiana, this is going to be the place where you just sort of give us the basic facts about the law. This is going to, this is going to be a place where you define your key terms, or you give us the basic context we're going to need to be able to get in depth with your issue that you're talking about. So I want to pull out another paragraph from the Papakarisi article from later in her essay to sort of think about how she uses her sources. And I want to give you especially an example of her going really deeply into one specific source. And let's think about how you do that, because that is one way that you're going to get to your required page length, is by going deep into your sources. The unique nature of internet discussion and its ability to transform the political environment into something reminiscent of but radically different from Habermas's vision of the public sphere is extensively detailed by Poster. Poster contended that rational arguments suggestive of a public sphere can rarely prevail, and that consensus is not possible online, specifically because it's an environment in which identity is defined very differently. Because identities are fluid and mobile online, the conditions which encourage compromise are lacking in virtual discourse. Dissent is encouraged and status markers are absent. Poster concluded that the internet actually decentralizes communication, but ultimately enhances democracy. So let's think about this paragraph a little bit. So in general, it follows the sort of structure of those other body paragraphs we looked at earlier in the lecture today. This is an example where you would want to cite your source in that in the topic sentence, because the entire paragraph is going to wind up being about Poster. But notice how she does that, but still makes her bun perform some kind of a synthesizing function, right? Because she's actually she's talking about she's having us focus on the big issue at stake here, right? It's not, let's just talk about Poster because Poster is one of my sources and that's what I'm going to do next, is to talk about my source. This is my time to talk about Poster. Instead, she's leading with the big issue that's at stake here. The unique nature of internet discussion and its ability to transform the political environment into something reminiscent of, yada yada. She's leading with the topic and not with the source. Okay, and then I want you to notice her citations. So she gives us the date, at least, with that first citation, and then she's going to go on to repeat the signal phrase without the date, right? Remember, we talked about that, because we know it's in the same paragraph. We get it that that's the same source. But notice how she brings in that signal phrase in the second sentence and in the last sentence, which indicates to us that all of this paragraph is about Poster. The other thing I want you to notice here is how deep she goes into his argument, how deep she goes in her, I mean, the same way you guys did with Scholes in Essay 2, she's seriously like explaining his point. Most of you guys had a paragraph like this in your Essay 2 on Scholes. So this is what you know how to write a paragraph like this, and this is another kind of paragraph that you're going to have in this essay. So let me just kind of pause there and kind of pull together some of what I've been saying, that you should have. So every paragraph should do some kind of synthesizing, right? Like connecting your source to other sources. But you can have paragraphs that talk about a lot of sources, and you can have paragraphs that are focused on going deep into one source. Okay, those are two kinds of paragraphs that you'll use at different points of your essay. So let's look at her conclusion. This study demonstrated how it is possible for conversations to be impolite without being uncivil. Impolite messages can be comforting because they betray the imperfections and passions of human nature. Impeccably mannered, uncivil messages, on the other hand, are far more alarming and are usually reprimanded online. Such messages have graver consequences because they are rarely taken back and because they openly contest individual rights. Such messages pose a threat to democracy and, by their very nature, thwart the development of a public sphere. So it's interesting stuff, right? She is she is, she's pulling together a lot of the pieces of her argument here, and she's working out the implications, right? Um, yeah. So let's think about this, the overall structure of this essay, of pulling. Think about how you might be structuring your essay. So I'm going to give you kind of two potential kinds of outlines that you might use to structure your essay. An intro, then a sort of define your terms, give basic context paragraph, the way we saw in Papakarisi's example. A sort of what we might call a literature review. And all that kind of a piece, what that kind of a piece does is it gives us the major arguments in the field. Like here's what a lot of critics are saying. Then you might analyze your primary source. Papakarisi does this when she analyzes specific, all of those specific discussion board postings. For you, this might be analyzing a blog or analyzing some interviews. And then finally, you might connect your primary source back to the issues represented in the lit review. Like, what does this add? What does this allow you to say? So this is the kind of structure you want to use if you found a really good primary source. You did a really great interview. You found a really great blog or something of that sort that that is going to be really useful for you to analyze. Now, what do you do if your primary source is not going to play that central of a role in your essay? Here's a structure for that situation, because you have to have a primary source, but we won't all find a primary source that's super awesome. For some of us, it's going to be your other sources that are kind of more significant. In that case, if your primary source analysis is not super crucial for you, you might have an intro, you might define your terms, then you'll have the literature review section. Here are the major arguments in the field, here are the major things that you're finding, and then finally, what are your conclusions generated by seeing all of these positions, all of these issues. So the structure, I mean, this is a good way to think about the structure if your primary source is not a super important part of your analysis. And so what you would do here in terms of making an outline, I would suggest, would be to kind of break down what the major arguments, major issues are in this field that you found in your sources, and break them down into a series of paragraphs, and there you are. Break down number 3 into, say, 4, 5, 6 different issues or arguments, and you're good to go. Okay, so yeah, okay, so let me just mention one thing from Gawande's essay here. I'm running out of time here. I won't be able to talk about it that much, but it's a fantastic article. Gawande was the one writing about the sort of conundrum of why healthcare costs so much in the US when we actually often do a really bad job at it. And I want to sort of think about the model of how he did his research, how he managed to do what we've been talking about for this whole lecture, which is looking at that problem from a lot of angles and perspectives and from a diverse array of sources. So let's just think about the sources he used. He looked at research studies on the cost of medicine. He talked to doctors. He talked to people who run hospitals, right, who were thinking a lot about cost and those kinds of issues. He analyzed quantitative data about cost, and he also used data from nonprofit organizations, from think tanks, from research centers, in order to give us a whole set of perspectives. Notice and notice how he didn't only talk to doctors, right? He also brought in this data that allows him to sort of see his question from a bigger, from a different point of view, right? The doctor sees one kind of perspective on this issue, whereas the sort of the quantitative data about the entire healthcare system lets us see that issue from another side. So keep thinking about that as you're doing your research. So let's wrap our heads around this week. So your annotated bibliographies are due on Monday, which you might have already turned in by now. Your draft is going to be due next Sunday, the 12th. And so that's good. It's really, really, really important to get it in by then so that I have time to get you comments so that you can revise it for your portfolio. Your homework is going to be about in-text citations. The discussion board, I haven't quite decided yet, but I will in just a minute. It will be something about making some progress on Essay 3. All right, you guys, covered a lot of material this week. Awesome. Good luck on your papers.